And two important practices that the church has been given by Jesus are baptism and communion. God's word directs the believer to observe communion and baptism for the very purpose of growing our faith. Because as we do these practices, what happens is it connects us to the sacrifices made by Jesus. See, through the ordinances of baptism and communion, God directs our worship, and he builds the church as we identify with the work of Christ. Right? Because communion is an act of worship. Baptism is an act of obedience. And as we do these things, we're identifying with Christ and the sacrifice that he made. And by doing these things, we deepen our faith. These practices help us to stay connected in our relationship with God. We avoid relational drift, like we were talking about, the long-distance relationship. These practices help us avoid that relational drift that happens in our faith on a regular basis. Maybe some of you have even made some sort of resolution to spend more time with God and to grow your faith. These practices draw believers together as we share these experiences together as community and in fellowship, right? I have, spent a lot of time in the car driving, in the Chicagoland area. I usually don't see people taking communion by themselves, and they're just kind of hitting the I-90. These practices deepen my faith because I can now identify with Jesus as I'm reminded of his sacrifice. But more importantly, I'm also reminded that I'm supposed to be a sacrifice in my life to other people. And so God has given us these gifts so that we can avoid that relational drift, to help deepen our faith. God's given us communion and baptism to help root our faith and to draw us back into fellowship. Because a lot of times our heart can often feel distant from God. And baptism and communion are not required for salvation. As we look at the thief on the cross, right? Jesus is there, and there's three people who are being crucified that day. It was Jesus and two thieves. And one thief mocked Jesus for what he did. If you're really the Messiah, then save yourself. Right? And so he's mocking Jesus to the very end. But the other thief has a different heart. The other thief must have had some sort of interaction with Christ, either before he was arrested or while he was in prison. But there's something about that thief that believes that Jesus is exactly who he says he is. And that thief says, remember me when you're in paradise. Remember me when you're on your throne. And in that moment, Jesus responds to him. And he says, surely today you will be with me in paradise. Right? He didn't say, quick, someone go get the Passover bread and the wine because he needs to have communion in order to be with me. And someone splash water on his face because he needs to be baptized. We need to do these things so that he could be with me. It's from this text that we can unpack and begin to understand something about our faith and about how to live out and practice our faith.